My educational giant, Soren Kierkegaard, or Kierkegaard, as we say here in America, is the father of existentialism. He was born on May 5th, 1813 in the 19th century in Copenhagen, which is the capital of Denmark. He was born into an affluent, wealthy family. His mother, Anne Soren's daughter, Soren Kierkegaard, was a maidservant to his father in his household before they were formally married. His father, Michael Peterson Kierkegaard, had great influence in his life and influenced much of how he thought. His father, a very pious man, is said to have believed he was under the wrath of God for the sin of fornication with his mother. She was pregnant before they were married, and other sins, and that the curse would be that he would live to see all of his children die. 5 of the 7 children did pass away, but Soren and his brother Peter Christian Kierkegaard, and Peter later became the bishop in Aalborg, Denmark, they both outlived him. His father was melancholic, anxious, pious, and intelligent, and Soren was just the same. Soren's experience with his father's notion of sin and his connection from father to son was a founding principle found in his later works. His father had occasional religious melancholic moments, but Soren and his father they shared a close relationship. His father taught him to explore his imagination, and Soren soared, so to speak, because of the games and exercises he played with his father. And this also had an impact on his later life. We see here from this example that adults have a very, very strong impact on young, impressionable minds. He was formally educated at the School of Civic Virtue and the University of Copenhagen. While at the School of Civic Virtue, he studied Latin and history. In 1830, at the University of Copenhagen, he studied theology, but leaned more towards philosophy and literature. He later graduated with a Magister Artium, which is the equivalent today of a PhD. Something that I thought was kind of interesting to get to know him, know who he was, is at the age of 24, he met Regine Olsen, whom he was instantly attracted to, and she as well to him. He wrote in his journal, "Oh, can I really believe the poet's tales, that when one first sees the object of one's love, one imagines one has seen her long ago." 3 years later, in 1840, he proposed to her, but broke off the engagement a year later in 1841 because he felt his melancholic attitude was detrimental to marriage. He never stopped loving her, though, and its reflection was apparent in his writings. As I previously stated, he was quite pious. It is quoted on pbs.org, summarizing his thought process on theology, or giving kind of a little snippet of his ideology and theology. It states, "The 19th century Danish philosopher and theologian Soren Kierkegaard put it best perhaps when he stated that holding religious faith depended on accepting paradoxes beyond reason, that there is no path to faith by way of reason, that we must indeed put aside reason in order to believe, to take that leap of faith. Science, on the other hand, is a practice of reason." Not only was he a theologian on his own and at the dying request of his father, but beyond that he was a philosopher. That was his passion. He believed in the existentialist viewpoint. Existentialism, at its basic definition, is this: a philosophical attitude associated especially with Heidegger, Jaspers, Marcel, and Sartre, and opposed to rationalism and empiricism, that stresses the individual's unique position as a self-determining agent responsible for the authenticity of his or her choices. Also given for a brief description from the Education Philosophy Inventory that we all took at the beginning of the semester, existentialism is a highly subjective philosophy that stresses the importance of the individual and emotional commitment to living authentically. It emphasizes individual choice over the importance of rational theories, history, and social institutions. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, claimed existence precedes essence. Sartre meant that people are born and must define themselves through personal choices. It is deep and it has many complexities, but here are the basics of it and some of the logical premises. An example as described by Kierkegaard. He uses an example from the scriptures. Actually, it's interesting. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states that existentialism, under the ideology of Kierkegaard, is one of the single individual. Kierkegaard developed this problem in the context of his radical approach to Christian faith. Let me share this entire section from the encyclopedia. It's kind of a long little quote that I'm quoting, but I think it's best understood in their own words. It states, open quote, "In Kierkegaard, the singularity of existence comes to light at the moment of conflict between ethics and religious faith. Suppose it is my sense of doing God's will that makes my life meaningful. How does philosophy conceive this meaning? Drawing here on Hegel as emblematic of the entire tradition, Kierkegaard, in his book Fear and Trembling, argues that for philosophy, my life becomes meaningful when I raise myself to that universal standard, by bringing my immediate natural desires and inclinations under the moral law, which represents my telos, or what I ought to be. In doing so, I lose my individuality, since the law holds for all. But my actions become meaningful in the sense of understandable, governed by a norm. Now, a person whose sense of doing God's will is what gives her life meaning will be intelligible just to the extent that her action conforms to the universal dictates of ethics. But what if, as in the case of Abraham's sacrifice of his son, the action contradicts what ethics demands? Kierkegaard believes both that Abraham's life is supremely meaningful. It is not simply a matter of some immediate desire or meaningless tick that overcomes Abraham's ethical consciousness. On the contrary, doing the moral thing is itself, in this case, his tempting inclination, and that philosophy cannot understand it, thus condemning it in the name of ethics. God's command here cannot be seen as a law that would pertain to all. It addresses Abraham in his singularity. If Abraham's life is meaningful, it represents, from a philosophical point of view, the paradox that through faith, the single individual is higher than the universal. Existence as a philosophical problem appears at this point. If there is a dimension to my being that is both meaningful and yet not governed by the rational standard of morality, by what standard is it then governed? For unless there is some standard, it is idle to speak of meaning." Close quote. Kierkegaard believes that, as it concludes in the encyclopedia, open quote, "to solve this problem there must be a norm inherent in singularity itself." Close quote. And it also states, open quote, "For Kierkegaard stands the crowd. The crowd is untruth," close quote. And in the PowerPoint that you see here, but not here, there's a little clip from YouTube. It's about a 40-second clip, kind of giving a visual overview of this ideology of existentialism and some of the premises of Kierkegaard's thoughts. And I don't know, I'm a visual learner, so I thought it'd be good. And you can click on that, I guess, after I'm done. Anyways, but so what are the implications and applications, and especially to education? I think the overall thesis of this is individuality. There has always been an existence. This has always been in existence. I think it's an eternal principle. But it is an internal principle. But Soren helped define it for our tangible understanding. Our Heavenly Father, we as members of the church understand this. Our Heavenly Father wants us to gain our own testimonies, wants us to be individual. Students are not robots to be controlled. Every student needs to find or has their individualistic niche. Understanding in the student realm encompasses a spirit of, as it says, from Sage Journals Online, an educational online journal, individual meaning that asks each man to ponder the reason for his existence. Close quote. Teachers need to foster a spirit of this while teaching and understanding each other's students. Teachers need to engender the spirit in the classrooms and in their classrooms. Students need to feel that. It takes time and patience and hard work. I think in the school system we see this philosophy defined in the ability of kids to join clubs or various organizations. This type of thinking is also encompassed by Montessori schools. Students are driven by themselves to an extent and their own development pace. The Montessori.org website states, in their section entitled About Us, open quote, "develop the human potential, inspire academic excellence, nurture curiosity, creativity, and imagination, and awaken the human spirit," close quote. And I hope that this has been helpful in your understanding of existentialism. Thank you.